First of all, we'll do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll dig straight into your engagement area profile reports to see the sort of information that you can find from them. And then we'll have a quick look at audience spectrum segmentation, because that is one of the key bits of data that you can find in the area reports. And I think it's worth spending a bit of time looking at it in more detail so you can see just how useful it can be to you. And we can look at the segments which are particularly relevant for your area at that point as well. So for anyone who's not at all familiar with it, we'll have a quick introduction and then we'll start looking at some of the segment portraits. And then right at the end, there are some links to further information about both the data that's in the EAPRs, but also audience development practice and things like that that you might find useful. So for anyone who's not familiar with the audience agency, quick introduction to us. I'm part of the consultancy team at the agency. When we were working from offices, I was based in the London office, although I live in Folkestone, so I'm working from home at the moment. And my role is largely exactly the sort of thing that we're doing today. So it's working with organisations, predominantly those with a visitor offer, so museums and galleries, heritage sites and libraries, to help them understand who they're engaging with, who they're not engaging with, and why they might want to reach those people, how they can reach those people, and really using data to inform a strategic approach to developing their audiences. So whether that's increasing footfall and getting more of the same sorts of people through the door, whether it's about diversifying their audiences in the widest possible sense of that word. So I think for a long time, it's been used as shorthand for ethnic diversity, but there are lots of different diversities within your communities. And the segmentation tool that we'll look at will really help you understand the sort of intersectionality of those different diversities. So whether it's age or ethnicity or socioeconomic background, none of those things individually determine whether somebody will want to engage with you or not. It's really about the barriers and opportunities they have as fully rounded people to engage with you. So we'll look in a bit more detail at that. And that's largely what my role is within the agency. And as Joe was saying, post-COVID, we have had, there are some burning questions that have emerged. And although some of the needs have remained the same, there are some very specific questions that have started to arise as a result of the pandemic. And here's some examples of the things that we are being asked quite frequently. So how do what's the difference between the people who visit you on site and the people who engage with you digitally? How can you adapt strategies that will meet the needs of both of those audience groups? A lot of organisations have been hit really hard financially, so not only through ticket sales, but also particularly for museums through secondary spend. So if you have shops and cafes on site, the loss of income from there, and what's the best way of trying to recoup some of that loss. And most particularly, how can you better engage with the people who are on your doorstep? Because we have seen that one of the biggest impacts that we've seen so far through COVID is people's unwillingness to travel compared to, where they might have been getting out and about before. So as Joe was saying, those coach trips that aren't happening, for example. So what I'd really like to hear from you is, what are your burning questions? What has come up for you that you really need to answer at the moment? So if we could just go around the group and if you could just very briefly introduce yourselves and your role in the museum you work for, and then perhaps one key question which is coming up either internally or in your in your meetings with other organisations as well. So I'm going to start with Nick, because you are front and centre in my screen at the moment. And once you've introduced yourself, if you could nominate the next person, that would be great.
Okay. Right, I'm a trustee and the secretary of the Archbishop's Palace Conservation Trust in Otford. And if you don't know where Otford is, think of the triangle between the M20, the M26 and the M25, and we're slap in the middle of that. And the palace is remains of a Tudor palace, just over 500 years old. We don't have too much difficulty in relating to audiences in the surrounding area, including the Darrant Valley itself, that runs from Sevenoaks up to Dartford. But we do want to increase our reach into South London and East London, particularly those boroughs where there is a high index of social deprivation. So that's our burning question.
Okay, thank you.
Who should I nominate? Well, the next one down on my list is Sam. So there you go, Sam.
I'm assuming there's not two Sams. I haven't got the whole gallery thing on. I'm not so sure if I count or not. So hello to everybody else. I'm Sam Bowen. I'm the other Museum Development Officer for Kent and Medway. And I've been working with Jackie on a cohort called Audience Champions, which is we're leading through more in-depth, I suppose, audience development with the cohort there. I don't really have a question, I don't think, actually. So let me just quickly view gallery, sorry. I will now nominate Joyce.
Right, I'm a new co-chair in Woodchurch Village Life Museum. Woodchurch is about four miles from Tenterton, about 6 from Ashford. I personally have been in the village for almost 40 years, but this is very new to me. So I'm really just trying to gather information. Our museum isn't central to our little village. It's about 800 participants, residents, and we're sort of a little walk away. So it's not necessarily to do with COVID. It's just generally trying to find out how we can get people into a little gem of a museum, basically. I am biased, but it is lovely. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Joyce. That's perfect. Thank you.
Oh dear, everyone has been. I need to look down my screen. Fiona, is it Fiona? Fiona Moore? Should I mention someone else?
Yes, move on to somebody else.
Judith Carruthers? Judith?
Hi, sorry, as usual, having problems unmuting there. Yeah, hi, I'm Judith Carruthers. So I work for the National Lottery Heritage Fund in the London South East region. So actually my interest is, and I sort of keep an eye on Kent, our mandatory outcome is a wider range of people being involved in heritage. So I'm always interested to see what sort of advice museums are getting around that, and for my own personal information. And it's great for me just to see which museums are coming today to get a flavour of what's happening in Kent, because it very much feels like the first steps coming out of COVID. I'm trying to get out and about a bit more. So that's really where I'm coming from. So I don't have a burning question either, I'm afraid. Shall I move on to someone else? Again, I'm struggling to get, it's to do with my, I've got a very small screen. Coralie, is it Coralie?
It is, yeah.
Hi, I know we've met before, so apologies if I mispronounced your name there.
That's perfect. Hi, my name's Coralie. I am director at the Princess.
You're very quiet, sorry.
Sorry. I'm the curator at the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment Museum inside Clover Castle.
Corey, we can't hear you. Are you able to?
I can hear you. I think you can't hear me. Sorry.
You might need to log out and come back in again. I was just going to suggest, do you want to put it in the chat, Coralie, and then nominate somebody else as well, just to speed things up?
Should we just go to somebody?
Please do.
Okay, Fiona, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I thought someone said Liz.
Ah, no, Liz, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think I misheard that.
That's fine.
I'm the curator of Sevenoaks Museum, and I started this position in 2019. Something that I immediately noticed was that a lot of people in our area didn't really know that the museum existed, because it's inside a building which houses the library and other things, and people often came across us by accident. And although I've been working on a really exciting program of events and exhibitions and things to try and make the most of a small little museum that we have, I'd really just like a bit of advice about how to get what people, we have that in our local area, and also how to get them in, really. And obviously things got put on hold over 2020, and it's time to start thinking about all that stuff. So yeah, and it's great to see already some museums I didn't really know existed being represented here. So yep, that's me.
Lovely, thanks, Liz.
Should I nominate Isilda, is it?
Yes, thank you, Liz. Perfectly pronounced. My name is Isilda, and I'm an equity, diversity and inclusion consultant. So I'm working with Southeast Museum Development and with Museum Development UK and Museum Development Yorkshire on their equity program. So for me, it's really important to have an understanding of how museums are looking at their audiences, audience segmentation, as part of supporting them to be more inclusive and develop programs that are relevant, and looking at their whole organizations in that way. So I don't have a specific question. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Is there anybody in that we've not heard from who would like to go next?
Yes, my name's Susan Hatt, and I'm a volunteer at Tenterden and District Museum, we are having real difficulties with getting footfall into the museum because we did rely on coach trips. We have an elderly demographic, and I think that might also be impacting on who's coming into the museum. As soon as we get people into the museum, they love it. We did a lot of work during the closed season and opened our storage area to the public. We put on 2 special exhibitions this year, one to do with the high street, making comparisons between how it was in 3 different time eras. And we've recently, and we're running at the moment, a creative collaborative exhibition that is based on a poem called Wealden by Nancy Gaffield, which is looking at walk through time and space and has been set to music by a local music group called The Drift. And we've looked at the last 1,000 years of history. It's also got a very strong ecological element to it, because what walking through time and space makes you aware of is how fragile the environment is around here, and how dependent we've always been upon the sea. So I think our main thing is we've reached out to the University of the Third Age by asking them to put together a photographic montage in response to the poem Wealden, hoping that we could get audience from the U3A, which is a fairly big organisation in the town. We've sent out packs to schools saying what we're doing and what we're prepared to do by looking at clothiers and woolen industry, because we've used as a theme people's relationship with the land, but it hasn't really affected our footfall. Okay. And we would love to know how, because we're all volunteers and we're running very, very fast, and we're not really getting an increase in footfall. And as I say, we do have an elderly demographic.
Great, thanks, Susan. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm sorry for anyone who hasn't had chance to speak and bring up their burning question, but hopefully we will cover some of those things that you've mentioned and how you can sort of get some more information to help you with those issues that you're facing. So moving on. So essentially the engagement area profile report is our most detailed and comprehensive resource. There's a lot in it, and it's really worth taking a bit of time to explore the different data sets. So after this session, you know, I would encourage you to have a dig around in the report. As a tool, it's most useful when you use it alongside other information that you have. So for example, what you already know about your local population and your communities, what you know about your existing visitor profile, for example. And all of that data you can bring together to inform your strategic planning, including the target activities that the South East Museums Development Network have identified, including your forward planning, so that audience development strategy that we talked about earlier, your community engagement and partnerships, and also your income generation. All of those things you can inform through looking at the data in your area profile reports. So the reports themselves look at the population in the catchment area covered by the report, and it looks at it through a number of different lenses. So you've got demographic information in there from census data, you've got audience spectrum profiling, which we will look at in a bit more detail, and also people's recent cultural activity, and that's through TGI data, which is a sort of national Mori poll on various different behaviours. The catchment area is set within the context of a base population, and for all of your reports, that base population is the whole of the South East region. And within the report, you can look at all of those different metrics, not only for the catchment area, but also at a ward level. So you can look at really detailed information about who is in your immediate catchment area. And that will give you a really detailed picture of your hyperlocal audiences and also beyond, which will support a very structured, layered approach to your audience development. So thinking about different activities and different messaging that you might use to engage different types of audience. So you can be really tailored about who you're targeting and how you're going to reach them. So we're going to look at the area profile reports next. There are two which cover your area. One which covers Medway and Kent Thames Gateway, and the other one which covers East, Mid and West Kent. So you can see the two regions there. Just going to So we'll look at, let's look at East, Mid and West Kent first. This is relevant for the majority of you in terms of your local audiences. For the Royal Engineers and Woodchurch Village Life Museum, I think both of you, oh no, I think you're in this one as well. So as I say, this one will cover most of your areas, but you also have the other one for people who fall outside of this. So you start with an introduction which tells you the area that it covers, and it also breaks down those ward areas as well for the map, so you can see what is covered by the report. Then there's a bit of an introduction to tell you all the different data sets that you can find in the report itself, and as you can see, there's a lot of them. So you get an awful lot of information from this single report. The first section is on your audience spectrum profile, and we will come back to that because we can look at that in a bit more detail. Then you've got attendance at Arts Museum and Heritage. So there's a general cultural engagement, which is part of the TGI data. And then there's a very specific set on museums and heritage attendance. And this gives an idea of the level of visiting within the 12 months previous to being asked the question. In this case, it will take into account the COVID gap as well, and also cinema visits. So it's looking at the sort of 12 months outside of COVID. Then you've got very detailed demographic information from the census data. So that looks at gender, age structure, ethnic background, and breaks it down into a lot of detail there. I'm skimming through these quite quickly, but you can see there's a lot of detail in them. Health and disability, and then a bit about healthcare as well. Then you've got something on employment and qualifications, which gives you the NSEC social grade levels within the area as well. So you know, if for example, Nick was saying that, you know, social deprivation is one of the key areas for them to look at, you can look at, you know, where those areas fall and the levels within your local region. And again, lots of different information related to that. And the next tab goes into country of birth and language and religion. So again, that will give you an idea of, you know, what different languages are being spoken in your region, in case you need to think about, you know, providing information in different languages, for example. And again, lots of information there, lots of background. One of the most useful segments for museums is the household breakdown, because many museums have a strong family offer as part of what they do. And this information will tell you what sort of household makeups are in your region, including the life stage and household size, and also the family makeup. So what age of children people have, the families have in your area. So again, you can make really targeted programming depending on whether you've got a higher proportion of early years or school age or older teenagers in families in your areas. So that's a particularly useful section. And then, as I say, you can take all of that information and you can look at it at a ward level. So the previous summaries look at the area as a whole, and then you can look to see what your particular area looks like. And I did a bit of investigation of this when I first got the list of people who are coming today. And so when we look at the audience spectrum segments, you'll be able to see that there are some significant differences in some of the ward level reporting. So I'm just going to pick, who shall I pick at random to have a look at? Let's have a look at Tenterden. So if we scroll down to here, and Susan, you were saying that you are aware that your population catchment is an older population, and that is completely reflected in your ward level reporting, which is your museum falls into Tenterden North. And here you can look at the differences. So, for example, we'll look at commuter land culture buffs in a minute. They are an older segment. They account for 31% of your catchment area in the ward, compared to only 16% in the region overall. So that's quite a significant difference. And it really brings home why it's worth looking at this level if you are interested in engaging your hyperlocal audiences. And also home and heritage, which is also an older group, again, much more highly represented in your ward catchment than in the area as a whole. So that's just a very brief look at, you know, why it's useful to look at this more granular level of information if you are looking at those audiences who are on your doorstep, in addition to those that you might bring in a little further afield from across the area. Just checking the chat to make sure I'm not missing any questions. There's some interesting comments in there. Thank you for those. And when you look across at all the other metrics, you can do the same. So you can see what sort of things people are doing. So in this area, quite a high proportion of people are interested in visiting art galleries, classical concerts, comedy is popular, plays are popular, and theatre. So people are getting out and about and doing, you know, various different things. And then we've got the museums and other heritage sites. And again, it is, you know, it's relatively high, but it is lower than theatre and gallery visiting, which is interesting. So that's something you might want to explore in more detail, you know, what it is that people are interested in. And then you can go through all of the demographics. So you can see, if we go up to the older age groups, again, much more highly represented in this ward than they are across the area as a whole. So some of these older age groups are almost double or over double what they are as a whole. Then you can look at ethnicity. I'm just going to skim through these because it's the same information as you saw earlier, but it is, you can look at it all by ward level. And as you can see, there's a very low proportion of people living in Tenterden North who are living in a family household. So if you're thinking about engaging those school age family groups, for example, you would be struggling quite a lot because in your hyperlocal area there really aren't that many families with children living in that area. So I think it really helps you to be targeted about what sort of programming you're doing and thinking about who is likely to engage with it. So it helps you to start from a point of view of, you know, the potential to succeed rather than giving yourself, you know, an impossible target to reach. So you can be very realistic about the sorts of audiences that you might be able to attract, and then think about what it is that they need, what they're looking for, what will actually bring them in through the door. So just skimming very quickly through all of that, you can see all of that level of detail is available for every single ward in your area. So just going to stop sharing that and go back to my slide set. So we'll just have a very quick look at the other area profile, which is Medway. This has all of the same information in it. And what we will see when we look at the segmentation in a moment is that although trips and treats and dormitory dependables, and we'll look at who those people are in a minute, are significant in both this area and in the other Kent profile, there is a difference in that in the other Kent profile, commuter land culture buffs are one of the top 3. They don't feature in Medway and Kent Thames Gateway, but Facebook families do, and they don't appear in the top 3 for the other region. So that's where it's really useful to have the split across the different areas, because there are, although within the southeast as a whole there's a lot of commonality, there are also distinct differences depending on where you are in the region, and particularly whether you are in a rural, a suburban, small town area, or in a larger urban, larger town, or near to larger cities. That has a big impact on what your audience, what your catchment looks like. Okay, so going to go back to this now. Does anyone have any questions at this point before we start looking at the audience spectrum segmentation? I'm aware that that was a very quick romp through how to look at the, you know, all of the data that's in the area profile report.
Are there any tools within the system which allow us to easily aggregate some of these demographics? It relates to the stuff that I've been putting into the chat. You know, our local audience is really quite small. Otford's only 4,000 souls. So we're looking at the whole of the Darrant Valley, which as Sam has reminded me, goes into a different museum development region, unfortunately. And London, you know, places like Tower Hamlets and Lewisham are presumably a whole other ballpark, dealt with, Sam says, by somebody else. I think the point is that the way in which we view certainly we view our audience, I don't know about others, is not by ward, but by the ease of getting here.
Sure.
And that's a different shape of country.
Yes, definitely. I think that's where the layering of information with what you are already aware of comes into play. So, for example, you might want to look at a slightly broader area if you know that transport links are particularly good in certain respects within, you know, with people being able to reach you. Whereas there might be barriers to engagement. So, for example, if you were looking at those London boroughs, what we do see, and you're quite right, that's covered by an entirely separate area profile. And you can get information about the London profile through one of our platforms, which is called Audience Finder, and I can give you some information about that after the session. But essentially what we do see with the lower engaged groups in London is that they don't travel far. So very few of them will travel outside of the borough. So it would be quite challenging for you to bring them further out to engage with you. But there may be other audiences in London that you would be able to encourage to make that journey. So there's all sorts of different considerations when you're looking at the different people and their behaviours and the barriers that they face and the opportunities that they have to engage. And that's something that the audience spectrum segmentation can really help you with, because although it's not a demographic segmentation, it does have demographic information within it, but it's predominantly looking at people's behaviours and relationship with arts and culture, you know, how they want to engage, what sorts of things they enjoy doing, what's going to encourage them, and the barriers they face. Oh, you can see my notes again. This is a joy. Okay, let me try again. So does that answer your question at all, Nick, in terms of layering up the information?
Just jump in on a museum development side of things. If you were wanting to target a particular audience that couldn't travel to you, perhaps you could look at partners that actually were physically in their locality and start doing partnership outreach maybe. So typically, you know, things like going to retirement homes and things into a different area. So there are ways of working with your colleagues, museum colleagues, or different partners, completely different cultural partners in a different location to you to get to those audiences, if that makes sense.
Does that help? Excellent. Did anyone else have any other questions about navigating the EAPR report? I'm aware there's a lot of information in there and you might need to spend a bit of time with them looking through to see what's useful to you. But do flag up at this point anything that springs to mind. No? Okay, that's good. I'm just trying to get back to the right screen now. Let's see if this works. Okay, hopefully you can see that screen now. Oh, I don't know what's going on with my screen. I am sorry. Oh, there we go. Let me see if I can see you now. Can you see? Are you seeing the slide set now? Or are you seeing the?
It's a bit small. Can you you can see the whole thing instead of the actual slide? That's better. Yeah. Well done.
Okay. Excellent.
Sorry, I'll just jump in. Sorry, Jackie.
Yes.
Susan's just sent a really good question. She said Sussex is very close to where we are, so obviously they'd be interested in that. But just to say, any of the areas that fall within the southeast, so West Sussex, East Sussex, Surrey, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, Hampshire, or any of those areas, you will have access to that as part of this programme we're running with Audience Agency. So we're very aware that many of you are literally on the border of some other counties. So yeah, we can support you with that through SEMD. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, audience spectrum segmentation is a really powerful tool for understanding both a little bit about the people who are visiting you, but in conjunction with the area profile report, it will tell you a lot about the people who aren't engaging with you. So you can see who's in your population and what might actually encourage them to engage with you. It's a full population segmentation. And for those of you who haven't used a segmentation tool before, essentially, I think it's really important to remember that it's not about stereotyping, and it's not about denying the fact that we are all individuals. What segmentations do is they look at what we have in common within a particular context. And in this case, it's the context of engagement with arts and culture. So this looks at the things that people have in common in terms of how they feel about arts and culture, the sorts of activities they like doing, but also what they enjoy doing in their lives other than engaging with culture. So, are they interested in gardening? Are they interested in, playing video games? What sorts of things do they do in their leisure time? What might you tap into in terms of what might drive them to visit? Are they looking for, a social activity, something they can do with friends and family? Are they looking to learn something? What sort of opportunities are most likely to draw them in? And the segmentation tool splits the whole of the UK population into 10 segments, depending on their propensity to engage with arts and culture. There are 3 highly engaged groups, 3 lower engaged groups, and 3 medium engaged groups, and 4 lower engaged groups. And I think for me, the important thing about the way the segmentation works is that it makes no value judgment about the types of arts and culture that people enjoy or their reasons for enjoying it. And also it recognises that everybody engages with arts and culture to some extent or another. And that may not be formal engagement. So it might be that although people don't make visits to museums, or they don't visit art galleries or attend theatre, they are doing things either in their own homes or in their own community groups, which are, creative and cultural. And I think that's really important to remember. So these are the 3 higher engaged groups. They make up not a high proportion of the population, but a very high proportion of the people who are out and about and engaging with arts and culture. What they have in common, what makes them higher engaged, is that they are all, they have a lot of confidence, they know what they like, they're very well informed, and they face very few barriers to engaging with whatever it is that they want to do. But within that, they do have varied habits and tastes, and they are different in terms of their demographic profiles as well. And we'll look at those in a bit more detail. There are 3 medium engaged groups. Again, they are more highly represented in the population than they are in audience profiles. For this group, they're slightly more cautious than the higher engaged groups. They're more drawn to sort of familiar offers, things that they know what they're going to get. But that being said, particularly for dormitory dependables, which is the highest engaged of this group, a lot of their level of engagement is to do with the opportunity that they have. So they live in more rural and suburban areas, so they might have to travel further to engage with arts and culture. They might do more if there was more available to them locally. And again, they're all at different life stages. And Trips and Treats in particular is a family segment, so they have very particular interests and needs and preferences. And then there are the four, oh, that's a typo on my part. There are 4 lower engaged groups: Up Our Street, Facebook Families, Kaleidoscope Creativity, and Heydays. And they make up a much larger proportion of the population than they do audiences. They do engage, as I said, everyone engages to some extent or another, but not in high proportions and not frequently. But I think it's important to remember that that lower engagement is not necessarily because of a lack of interest. It's very much more to do with levels of confidence, understanding what they might get from a visit. But alongside that, for these lower engaged groups, one of the key barriers is not only not knowing what to expect, because it's not something that they do regularly, it's not part of their sort of experience, but also not knowing what might be expected of them when they visit, particularly things like museums and heritage sites, where they might have the perception, particularly if they have children, you know, if the children are noisy or running about, are they going to feel embarrassed? What sort of welcome are they likely to get? Are they expected to have a certain level of knowledge in order to engage with, you know, the things that they're looking at? Excuse me. So I think that's really important to bear in mind when you're thinking about the messaging for these groups. Is really thinking, you know, what is going to make them feel most comfortable, most welcome in your venue. Heydays in particular, they are the lowest engaged group of all, and they're also the oldest. And the reason for their lack of engagement is they face very significant physical barriers to getting out and about. Many people living in this segment are in sheltered housing or care homes. But earlier on in their life, they may well have belonged to one of the more engaged segments. So for this group in particular, it shouldn't be thought that they're not interested in engagement, but in order to work with them, a certain level of outreach might be necessary, because you might need to take activities and opportunities to them if they're not able to visit you on site. So lots of things to think about in terms of those different group needs and preferences and what they're sort of looking for. And from our website, you can get very detailed information about each of these segments. And this is just a snapshot of the sort of level of information that you can get. So because of the very large data sets that we use to inform the segmentation, so it brings in census population data, Experian consumer data, which drives the mosaic segmentation, which some of you may be familiar with, which is a more socioeconomic segmentation. And the Taking Part survey, which gives us a lot of information about how people feel about arts and culture. Is it part of their everyday life? Is it something they do for a special occasion? That sort of information. Also about their media consumption habits, so we know, you know, where they're most likely to see messaging about your offer. That's all in there as well. So within these tabs, you have a sort of brief overview summarizing what this group is, what differentiates it from the other segments. Then it looks at their interests, and that is interests beyond arts and culture, in addition to their sort of museum and heritage visiting and that sort of thing. Where they are in the country, so there's mapping, so you can see the hotspots of where these people are located. Their preferences, what sorts of things they like to do. Are they looking for participatory type activities or more sort of exhibition visiting? What's likely to draw them in? And lastly, how to engage. So those routes into tapping into their you know, the communication channels they're most likely to use, and what sort of messaging they need, what level of information, because again, that's something that's quite different for each of these groups. And you can use that to inform a sort of an engagement strategy. So even if you're promoting the same offer to different groups, for example, what you say about it and how you communicate it might be different depending on the target audience. Okay. So to look at these people in a little bit more detail, I've put together some slides which look at who are the most prominent segments in your catchment areas. So in terms of the overall areas, for both of your Kent profiles, commuter land culture buffs feature highly in the mid, south and north Kent profile. Dormitory dependables feature highly in both profiles. Trips and treats feature highly in both profiles, and Facebook families feature highly in the Medway profile. And when I looked at some of your locations in the local ward level, so that more granular level of reporting, the key segments which came up for a number of you were up our street, home and heritage, and experience seekers. So I think this is important to recognise that although there are segments who are common across the area as a whole, there are also specific segments which are more important in your local area. So when we looked at that ward level for Tenterden, you could see that commuter land culture buffs were particularly high for them, but so were home and heritage, even though as a whole they don't feature in the top 3 for either area profile. So that's where that really detailed information becomes very important to understand, you know, who is on your doorstep, who are your hyperlocal audiences. So I'm very aware of time. We've just got 6 minutes left in the session. So I'll go through these very quickly, just to give you an illustration of the differences within those segments. So this is the sort of information that you can pull from those pen portraits. So commuter land culture buffs are one of the most highly engaged groups. They're the most likely segment to say that arts and culture is an important part of who they are. But they're also one of the older groups. So they've been quite hard hit by COVID, for example, because of their age, they've been more vulnerable. And a lot of organisations pre-COVID were quite reliant on commuter land culture buffs because they were such an important part of the audience. They were also tended to be individual givers and supporters of particularly their local organisations as well. And they were happy to pay for sort of premium experiences. So they do represent quite a loss to a lot of organisations, and they were a key audience for museums and heritage visiting. So they won't be travelling as far as they were, but if you have them in your local catchment, it's definitely worth thinking about how you might engage them, because they are such an important audience for your type of offer. It's something that they are particularly drawn to, and they are likely to support you as well. If you can engage them as an audience, they'll be very loyal to you once you've got them in. So that's a little bit about commuter land culture buffs. Experience seekers are at the opposite end of the demographic scale. They are the youngest segment. They're mostly in urban areas, but when I was looking at your sort of local profiles, the reason I put them in here is that they are particularly relevant to a couple of your segments, a couple of your areas. So it tends to be the more larger towns and cities where you find them. So they are quite predominant in Dover, for example. So as a younger group, they're looking for more sort of a social experience, something a bit different, something they've not done before. They're not a loyal audience. So they're the sort of Friday late crew. So if you're putting on new and different types of event that are very social, have a bit of food and drink in the mix, that's the sort of thing that they're going to be attracted to. They're also very highly engaged digitally. They were pre-COVID and they continued throughout the pandemic. But again, they're looking for sort of more experimental things rather than delivering something in a digital platform that you also do physically. So they're looking for things which are kind of born digital, so new types of activity. So they're less relevant to all of you, but if you do have them in the catchment, it's worth looking at, and you're aiming to get a younger audience in, it's worth looking at what might attract them. Dormitory dependables are key to pretty much all of your areas. Again, they're an older group. They are regular, if not frequent, attenders pre-COVID. They are slightly older as a group. So one of the key things they've been looking for post-COVID is outdoor opportunities. So if you're in an area where you've got perhaps an indoor attraction, but it's also set in a sort of an outdoor heritage type setting, that's something that's going to be really attractive to them. And again, they are looking for things that are on their doorstep. They're perhaps not looking as further afield as they were before. So, you know, depending on who you had visiting you before, you may see new people coming through your door who fall into this group. Again, they're looking for a sort of a social experience, something to do with their friends. Trips and treats, again, very important both for your region and also for museums. They're a family group. They like museums because they understand what the offer is. They will be looking for sort of, pre-COVID, they were looking for day out opportunities. So they were looking for the whole experience, you know, what else they could do in the area. Post-COVID, they're really looking for things that they can do locally with their friends and family. So reconnecting with the people that they weren't able to see through the lockdowns. So that's a key part of what they're looking for now. Home and heritage, again, an important group for many of you. Another older group. They have the largest proportion of National Trust and English Heritage membership in this group, and they were a big part of the coach tour day out market as well. So they will be missing that, but they will also be looking for those opportunities closer to home, so they're not having to take a coach trip. So again, you may have people coming in that you haven't seen before that perhaps were going elsewhere in the area but are now looking closer to home. Up Our Street is one of the lower engaged groups. They tend to be in sort of outlying neighbourhoods of towns. Arts and culture aren't a huge part of their life. Their family life is very important to them. They're not a family with children group. There's a lot of older couples in this segment, but their social groups are very important to them. So their extended friends, networks and so on, they like to do things as a group, and they're very interested in doing stuff at home as well. So gardening and DIY is very important to them. They have been hit quite hard economically by the pandemic. A lot of them have been furloughed and have been made redundant. So any offer that has a cost attached to it is likely to be quite a big barrier for them. And very briefly, Facebook families are another lower engaged segment. They are a family group, as their name suggests. Again, they've been impacted quite significantly financially by COVID, but they do pay for an offer where they know that the return is guaranteed. So this is a group who really enjoy getting out and about with their family and friends to theme parks and things like that, which are not inexpensive, but they have a guaranteed experience. So they know they're going to have a good time when they go out. That's the sort of thing that they're looking for. So very, very briefly, I'm aware that we're over a little bit of time now. How do you think you might be able to use this information in the EAPRs? Can you see how it might apply to the work that you do? Any thoughts on that?
It's given me the confidence that who our groups are in our area, so that it's the confidence to kind of continue programming that actually relates to who we have around, rather than just guessing that this seems like a good thing to do. Because so far what I've based it on is who I've just seen coming in, but this is really useful to kind of make sure we're not just missing a whole group of people that do engage culturally in our area but just have never engaged with our venue. So yeah, I think it was useful.
Great, thanks, Liz. Any other thoughts on how you might use this this information?
I was just interested to see how many of the groups seem to be digitally confident or fully digitally engaged, and thinking, obviously it is a bit of a shift, it's a pivot that museums have had to make over the last 18 months. But I think that, I don't know, maybe ever the optimist, that shows promise that now we've developed those skills, that there is a market for it out there, and that there's an appetite, even if it's just holding people until they're ready to physically come back in maybe, I don't know, a year, 6 months' time. But for many people, it's about monetizing that, isn't it? It's about how to actually make some income generation from that. So I know we are offering some digital skills training for other colleagues within the South East Museum development soon. So if that's something you're interested in, please do look on the website. I know Joe will probably ping in some details, I'm sure too. But that was promising to me, because I didn't think that digital engagement actually was something that people could shift their cultural happiness with. And also, personally, as a family, we've been involved in having like art kits and things sent out to us, which is really great as well. So it's still a physical experience, but something you're doing within your home. And then and also, personally, as a family, we've been involved in having like art kits and things sent out to us, which is really great as well. So it's still
join the meeting.
Weird.
Anyway,
oh, yeah, never mind. So I think there's a combination that you can work with digital, and I mean through social media and Facebook connections and stuff as well as some physical contact.
Definitely, and I think it's going to be one of the longer lasting impacts of the pandemic is that people have become more attuned to digital engagement, but even within that, people have different preferences for what they're looking at, and there is information about how COVID has impacted on each of the segments available through our COVID participation monitor we've been running, and all of that information is freely available from our website. There's a link to it at the end of this slide set, so I would recommend having a look at that as well, because for example, with the experience seekers, they are very much looking for something which makes the most of digital as a medium. So it's looking at quite experimental things. Whereas for some of the other groups, like Dormitory Dependables, they've been filling the gap, as you say, Sam, in their cultural engagement. So they've been engaging with things like 360-degree tours that a lot of museums and heritage sites have been doing, or curator tours and things like that. So it's what they would have done on site, but they're just doing it digitally because they're not able to, as opposed to being something which is inherently digital in its delivery, which some of those higher engaged groups like the experience seekers are looking more for that sort of content. So I think that's the key thing with using the segments, is not to only look at the summary of each one and feel that that gives you enough of an idea of who these people are, but actually dig into the pen portrait, really get under their skin, understand them, because it will help inform your decision making around, what sort of programming you do, and also your marketing strategies as well. So where you're putting information out and what sort of messaging. So for those lower engaged groups who are less confident, they're less likely to be interested in, for example, if you're presenting an exhibition which is in a partnership with a well-known artist, for example, or something like that, they're less likely to be interested in who that artist is than in whether it's free or not. And really basic information around the, is it a family-friendly welcome? What sort of activities might be available for their children if they're visiting as a family? What's the experience going to be like for them? I think that's really key to engaging people who aren't confident and regular visitors, and I think it's something that we tend to forget, working in the sector and being very familiar with our own sites. It's sort of stepping outside of that familiarity and thinking, if I was doing this for the first time, what is it that I would need to know? So an exercise that's quite useful sometimes is to think about the last time you did something that was entirely new to you, and what made you anxious about it, and what helped alleviate those feelings of anxiety. What sort of information were you looking for, and then tailor that to the needs of the target group that you're wanting to engage with. Any other thoughts on how you might use this information? Sorry, I keep losing my voice.
So sorry, Jackie, just to clarify, obviously we've commissioned, South East Museum Development have commissioned the reports for the South East of England.
Yes.
If people are interested in reports for other areas like the London ones, is it best to come and talk to you about the fees for that? I know on your website you have got some free ones, but if people are looking for specifics, could you just explain how the process for that would work?
Absolutely. So yes, you can commission an area profile of any area at all that's of interest to you. So that can be as small or a larger catchment as you need. As Joe says, there are each of the Arts Council regions is covered by an area profile report that you can download for free. London is one of those, for example, but it does give you the whole of London. It doesn't go into the level of detail that you have in your EAPRs. So it doesn't look at it at a postal district or a ward level. It's for the whole. Of London. If you want to commission an individual report which has a very specific area, the costs for that vary depending on the level of detail that you need. But if you just go to the Audience Agency website and put in a search for area profile reports, it brings up all of the information on the various different reports that are available and the attendant costs for each one. I think they start at about £150 or something like that for an individual report. That's at the most basic level. Any other thoughts on how you might
Sorry, I'm just going to answer Liz's question because I suspect most of you are wondering this. Liz has asked, I missed where we can download the Kent report from. You haven't missed it. We will be sending it to you. So actually the reports are only accessible to those of you who've attended the training. They won't be freely available on our website. So because you're here, you will be sent them directly and you can request them across the South East. Equally, as I said, you can attend the other training sessions for the other regions if you wish, but as you're on the session, you will get them. Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I thought that might be the case, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Not a silly question at all, so don't worry. But no, thank you for asking. I'm sure everyone else is wondering the same. You'll be sent them when you get the evaluation form.
That's the price you pay.
And as I said, you can request more as long as it's within the South East. And I put in the chat just to remind people which is the area that the South we cover.
Great. Thanks, Joe. I mean, I'm aware that it's a lot of information to look at very briefly, and you may have questions that come up once you actually start digging into the reports and thinking about what that means for you as an organisation. As part of this sort of suite of training that we're doing for South East Museums Development, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So as I say, my contact details are at the end of the slide set. So if once you've had a chance to have a look at the reports, you're unsure about what you're looking at, or if you just want to sort of bounce some ideas around about how you might use the data, I am more than happy to get in touch, you know, if you drop me a line, or, you know, we can arrange a call afterwards. So that support is here. There's also a lot of information on our website, which I have put into the sources and resources bit of the slide set. I think it's probably worth just spending a couple of minutes at the end of the session now. I'll see if I can get back into the right slide.
I'll just jump in, Jackie, and ask the question. Excuse me. I don't know, Judith, are you still on the call? I can't necessarily see you, Judith.
Yes, I am still on the call. Yeah, I don't
want to put you on the spot, but obviously, well, I'm going to, of course I am. As funding streams are now reopening again, and we're sort of hopefully, you know, eventually looking towards moving away from the kind of the all the reopening type funding. I know that Heritage Fund are very much focused on people knowing who their demographic are and their target audience, and the need, importantly, the need to prove the need actually in that application process for funding. So you need to have all of that sort of knowledge, don't you, to actually put your application in. I was just wondering, I mean, I guess I've just said that, but could you clarify that for people? Because obviously there's an element of homework involved in this, but the benefits aren't just about managing to go and attract new audiences. This could actually help you with funding applications, couldn't it, this information?
Yeah, completely, yeah. So, I mean, and it wouldn't just be us, it'll be any funder. It's all about, as I said at the beginning, so our mandatory outcome is a wider range of people being engaged in heritage, actually is involved in heritage. So what we expect from any project is that they are engaging with audiences they don't currently engage with. And again, it's proportionate to the size of heritage site you are. So if you're just coming to us for £3,000, we don't expect anything revolutionary, but just expect you to engage with some new audience, some new group. So this kind of segmentation that Jackie's been taking us through, that kind of getting to understand who visits your site and who's not visiting your site, and being strategic about it, not thinking I've got to get everyone in, but using these kind of different segmentation that Jackie has talked about, and thinking to yourself, what's realistic audience that you can attract to your site? Now, for us, you have to be aware that we're really looking to try and get those groups who wouldn't normally visit sites. So it's those ones who are the ones who aren't coming more often, who've got more barriers around it, that you would be trying to attract to get our funding. But don't forget, you can resource that in your project with us. So you can make sure that you've included, well, what are the barriers for these people coming? So it's some of our facilities, it's some of the content, it's actually they're having to pay for this time. And you can think through a project to try and remove those barriers for them. So absolutely, this kind of work is very important, I think.
That's perfect. So actually, it really does, yeah, because you're absolutely right. The objective is to get in people who are not engaging as much. And as we've just seen, even within Kent and Medway, it flips completely. We're not surprised about who that actually might be for you, depending where your location is. So thank you. I just wanted that to be clarified.
And can I just speak, because I think this point you made, Sam, earlier on, I think partnership working is really vital. Certainly for us, successful projects are those who are working with other organisations to try and bring in those audiences. We don't expect you, the heritage site, to have that expertise to try and get some of these audiences. And so it's reaching out to try and find those organisations who can help bring in those audiences. And I do find that museums forget about their local CVSs, the community volunteer services, are a very useful resource to try and find out other organisations, or try and find, getting funding support as well there. So it's reaching out, try and be as outward facing as you can be.
Fantastic. That actually is a really nice segue into my final couple of slides about using all of this information, how you might layer it up and make best use of it to inform your strategic planning. So I'm hopeful that this is going to go to the right slide. Hopefully you can see that. Do I see any nodding heads? I do see nodding heads. Marvelous. The first step is really to think about how does the population in your area, how is that reflected in the people who are coming in through your door? So are there groups within your catchment area who are prominent in the population? So there's, you know, there's a decent proportion of them, but you don't see them visiting you. And then to think about how you might reach out to them. So what are the best routes of communication? Is it through sort of active promotion? Is it about online and sort of social media? Is it about getting in touch with local community leaders or trusted sources of information within those communities to have them act as an advocate for you, and sort of introducing them to your offer so that they can be confident about sharing it? So sort of almost like ambassadors or champions for you. And then think about what is it that they're looking for from an offer. So you might have a fantastic offer, but the way it's being presented isn't really chiming for them. It's not really telling them, you know, what are they going to get out of the experience if they come and visit you. And then thinking about how you might want to develop the offer that you have, or as I said before, change the way that you are actually talking about it in the places that you're putting information out to reach those audiences who aren't coming in at the moment. And it's not about changing everything that you do in order to meet the needs of a particular group. It's thinking about what is it about the things that you do which will be meaningful for the people that you want to engage with. And if you have the opportunity, talk to them, find out what it is, you know, that's stopping them from engaging with you. You know, run little focus groups or something like that, so that you can really understand what the barriers are for those super local communities or the groups that you want to engage with. But I think it's also important within all of that to think about why it's important for you as an organisation to work with those audiences. How is it going to help your strategic development? How does it meet your mission and vision, your purpose? So, you know, and also how, you know, is it going to help you secure funding? Is it going to help you tell the stories that you want to be able to tell about the things that you do? And then think about, you know, what's in it for them. So, you know that you want to work with them. Why will they want to work with you? What can you offer them that's going to be attractive to them? Think about their particular post-COVID needs. Some of these may be short-term. So it might be about, for those older groups, making sure that you're really clear about any safety measures that you've put in place, which are still there. How that might impact on their experience, but also the fact that, you know, they will be safe while they're on site with you. They're not putting themselves at further risk. Some of them might be longer term, so thinking about that sort of digital programming and things like that. And as Sam said, you know, a lot of people have upskilled very, very quickly to pivot to that digital engagement. And it would be such a shame if all of that skill and investment was lost. So really think about how you can use all of your learning during the pandemic and apply it to programming going forward. So you might have, you know, some digital content, you might have some on-site content. Some of it you might join it together in what's being called, you know, a hybrid offer of, you know, some online and some on-site. So that's definitely worth thinking about in terms of the balance of those two things. What we have seen in the monitor is that the most important factors, the most significant factors in terms of people's readiness to return to on-site in-person visiting after the pandemic are their age and health, their financial situation, but also their existing levels of engagement pre-pandemic. So, for example, with the digital cultural digital engagement has been higher with people who were already highly engaged pre-pandemic. We haven't seen a significant growth in online engagement from people who were lower engaged before. So all of those existing preferences and needs and barriers are still there, They've just been perhaps exacerbated by COVID. So there are additional things to think about in that context. So little summary of all of that. So you can use the data in the area profile reports to identify, where there are hotspots and where there are cold spots. So that, a hotspot might be where there's a significant proportion of people that you will be attracted to your offer because they're the sort of people who are coming already. So in your strategy, thinking about different ways you might grow your audience. So audience development can happen in a number of different dimensions. So it could be about increasing footfall, and that can be about more of the same sorts of people who are already coming. So it could be that that your audience has, a significant proportion of one particular type of group, but there are more of those people in the population than you are reaching. So that gives you an opportunity to, you don't really need to do anything other than perhaps some targeted marketing at those people to bring them in, because you already know that what you do appeals to them. You don't really need to change that very much. It might be about deepening your relationships with those existing audiences. So, perhaps bringing you on board as advocates and supporters, individual givers, thinking about, the sort of financial priorities that you might have, particularly at the moment post-COVID. So, who might you build a deeper relationship with in terms of your existing audiences? That's also developing. And then there's reaching out to those different audiences, so people who aren't engaging with you at the moment. And that's where you might need to do a little bit more work, because it might be about fine-tuning your offer to meet their sort of preferences. So for example, if you're running an exhibition and the target group that you're looking at is more drawn to participatory activities, thinking about the programming around that exhibition, what sort of activities you might run that would draw those people in. Is there a family-friendly offer that you can make for the family segment? Can you build is there capacity for a social experience? If people are walking around in groups, are they going to feel comfortable and happy to be talking to one another? Or, is that the sort of welcome that they get? So all of those different ways, it's important to think about what you're going to do for the different types of audiences that you want to engage with. And also, I think it's important to remember that you don't have to appeal to everybody all at the same time. In your development plan, it can be staged, so you can deliver certain activities at certain points of your program to target a particular audience. It doesn't mean that the other audiences are not important to you, and it doesn't mean that some of them won't come anyway. But you can be very targeted about particular activity that you do for particular groups that you want to work with. And then, in the rest of the program, you might do other things which appeal to different target groups. So, it can be a bit overwhelming if you're thinking about everybody that you want to bring in all at the same time. But, audience development it's a long-term investment. It's not something that you can achieve straight away. So, using the data, use it to make sure that whatever you're aiming at is achievable for you. So you're not setting yourself up to fail, because that can be very disheartening. And most importantly, work as a team. I know some of you are in very small organizations, with perhaps only, one or two people, or, entirely volunteer run, for example. But it's important to think about these strategies as a team, so that understanding of who your target groups are and why you want to work with them, what sorts of things you might do, all of that is shared amongst you, and it means that whatever you put in place is much more likely to succeed, because everybody's on the same page and you're all pulling together. So I think that's really key as well. That's all of my slides. As I say, there's information about how to get in touch with us and get in touch with me individually, and also there's lots of links to further information that you can use to layer up with the area profile reporting.